Hello world, this is SPARTIE-Cast.
Hello and welcome to SPARTIE-Cast, a series of conversations related to the SPARTIE Lab's research, from game studies to media psychology to avatar effects to mediated mobility. I am Dr. Robby Ratan, your host and director of the SPARTIE Lab. SPARTIE stands for Social and Psychological Approaches to Research on Technology Interaction Effects. Oh, it's a mouthful. This is episode 10. Woo, 10. A great base number, as well as number of fingers or toes to have. But more importantly, this is the episode where we take a step back. We do a bit of navel gazing. Why? Because I finally have a bit of an idea of what this podcast is really going to do and what I aspire for it to do in the future, and maybe why people might care. So we started this podcast a few months ago, early 2021. I was inspired by some of my colleagues who have been posting, such as Dr. Rachel Cowart, who was posting her own videos relating to her research, relating to her outreach efforts. And I thought, oh, this is a great way to engage with scholars, especially during the pandemic when I'm not going to see them at conferences. Engage with these colleagues of mine on issues that are interesting and other people might find interesting as well. I was also inspired by Prof G, the Scott Galloway podcast. It's called the Prof G Show. He's an academic. He's also a business person. I'm interested in the finance side of technology as well as the psychology of it. And his podcast is really funny. And actually, I interviewed him not long ago for an episode. And that was a pretty cool moment for me because I got to reflect a bit on what podcasting is and why it's valuable and important and how to do it. And so we're going to try to amp up this podcast a little bit, the SPARTIE-Cast, by starting with a new bumper, meaning an audio intro and outro. We're going to introduce the podcast in a little bit more detail. My awesome, supportive students who have been helping me, producer George Mcneil, who's also at Impact Radio, MSU's Michigan State University's campus radio station, and our technical director, Connor Bird, who is a fresh person, a first-year student at MSU in computer science and game design, and he's been my research assistant, and he's also been interested in helping out on this project. So thanks to them for the feedback. My next episode is going to be with one of the directors at Impact Radio who helped me think about this podcast and figure out what types of equipment to use. It's not easy to really set this thing up, and we're media researchers, so we kind of have a leg up. Jumping around, so my first episode was with Dr. Cowart, Rachel, and I talked about toxicity in video games. That's a topic on which I've been publicly vocal. I wrote an op-ed in Wired magazine this year or recently, and it essentially argues that toxicity in gaming is an important topic, not just because of the effects in the gaming context, but because there are negative effects outside of gaming, psychological harm that's done to players when they're exposed to toxicity. That psychological harm is disproportionately targeted toward women, people of color, for reasons of identity, not just gender and race, also sexual orientation and ageism. So toxicity in games matter, and I wanted to bring that topic to light. I thought that was a great place to start because it's a topic on which I've been publicly vocal, but there are so many other topics that I do research on and engage the lab with, and my students study as well. So the next topic we focused on was game studies, the history of the field of game studies, coming from the field of communication, which is my home, though of course game studies extends into many different other silos of research, from psychology to sociology to critical studies to of course design and production. But Dimitri Williams and Mia Consalvo, who are OG game study scholars, joined us for that one. The next episode, I recruited my good friend and colleague, Sunny Rosenthal, who is a professor at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore, where I spent my sabbatical last year and got to know his research on presentation of self in online courses, instructor social presence, connecting with your instructor through videos, kind of like this, except his are way better than mine, more technologically advanced. And so I thought that would be an interesting tie-in to thinking about the media of communication for education contexts or in more informal contexts like this one. Then I jumped to one of my favorite topics, the Proteus Effect, with Dr. Stephanie Bucine. I reached out to her to ask for some data for a study that she had published, and she was kind enough not only to share that data with me, but also to come on the episode and just tell me about her interest in avatar effects, such as the Proteus effect. If you're not familiar, it's the phenomenon that when you use an avatar with certain identity characteristics, such as a taller avatar compared to a shorter avatar, it will affect your behavior. Taller avatars lead people to negotiate more aggressively. More attractive avatars lead to more social confidence. My favorite, which Stephanie Bucine has done with colleagues in multiple studies, is findings that when you use an inventor avatar, one that is carrying a clipboard or wearing a lab coat, you will come up with more creative ideas during a brainstorming task. So this is a phenomenon on which we published a meta-analysis last year, and I'm very interested in the effect and in delving into the theoretical mechanisms of the effect. So that was an exciting episode for me. I followed it up. I think I was working on a grant proposal, so I didn't have time to record episodes. So I followed it up with a couple of my raps, my hopefully not too cringy raps. The first one being about the Proteus effect, which summarizes the effect and I think its importance in society, the potential for a use and abuse of the Proteus effect. Then I also did my faith in science rap. Why I was reminded of the March for Science back when the political climate in our country, the United States, was a little bit different than it is today, kind of post Fauci and coronavirus, though it's still fraught. But anyway, I thought that would be a nice kind of bonus episode like this one. Next, we turned our attention to some researchers in the lab. So George Mcneil, who works on this podcast, has also been a researcher with me for most, I think, of his undergraduate career at MSU. And then Anne Desrochers has also been a researcher with me. And so I interviewed them. That was really fun to interview students who are involved in research, because I'm trying to figure out the audience for this podcast. I imagine it's students who are in the field, who are trying to learn about what's going on, find maybe more informal ways of connecting to the field. And this is one of them. So of course they are undergraduates, but PhD students, I think, would find this connection with student researchers helpful. Next, I interviewed my, I guess, podcast hero, my running partner, because I listen to him when I go running, Scott Galloway, as I mentioned. And that was pretty cool. He's got quite an outfit. He has 2 studios, one in New York, where he works up at Stern Business School, one in Florida, where he lives. These are high-tech studios. His engineer was in, I think, New York, but switching on all the equipment for him in Florida. He walks in, he's like, "Who are you again?" Because it's all been scheduled through his staff. And it's a machine. The amount of just media content that Scott produces is very impressive, from his blog to multiple podcasts, multiple episodes per week per podcast. And he's engaging with important topics. I find him to be staunchly middle of the road on political issues, which is refreshing, because I think we're often exposed to kind of the polar extremes. So now we've got a middle pole in a way. I mean, he's certainly left-leaning and believes in promoting equality in society, believes in government as a mechanism in education, as a democratizing kind of force, And so I've learned a lot from him, and it was great to catch up with him on that, though it has not much to do with media research. So we bounced back to Damna Banaku on the next episode. She's a virtual reality researcher who's also done work in the Proteus Effect. And she's in Barcelona. She works with Mel Slater, who's got this amazing lab in Barcelona that's been putting out great VR research, Proteus and otherwise, for quite some time now. So that was cool. I'd love to get more connected with that network of scholars there. And so that's why I reached out to her. And what next? What comes next? Well, I think my next episode is going to focus on, as I mentioned, podcasting a bit more. Then I plan to interview colleagues in my department because I think it's great to showcase what's happening at MSU. We've got great researchers, Casey O'Donnell, a great game studies researcher, plus other areas of research, programmers, and I don't know, so I'm looking forward to interviewing him to see what's going on there. And then after that, it's uncertain. If you're listening to this episode and you have a good idea, let me know. If you want to co-host this podcast or help produce it, let me know. I'm thinking about launching another podcast that's a little less focused on the lab, maybe something that's kind of just my brain children, to focus on my experience with my children. I've got a few kids, and so maybe bring parenting into it. I might call it the Robby Show, the Dr. Robby Show. I don't know. I'd like it to be funnier than just pure research, maybe a little more current event-y. I'm not sure, but I'm excited about that prospect. I'm very excited about this podcast. Hope that you enjoy any of the episodes that you choose to listen to. Thank you so much for being more than an audience member, but for being someone who maybe subscribes, hits the like button. I need to start saying that, right, George? And anything else? Let me just, so the SPARTIE Lab, let me explain. SPARTIE Lab, the social and psychological approaches to research on technology interaction effects lab, is named for our very own mascot, SPARTIE, but spelled differently, the MSU mascot. And so hopefully we connect to the MSU culture. I am not the most sports fanny person. Certainly not amongst the faculty or community members at MSU. Still, I think SPARTIE's cool. SPARTIE's like an avatar for MSU, and I've done a little bit of research on what controlling SPARTIE, the mascot, as an avatar does for certain types of behaviors that might not be the most positive on misogynistic behaviors. And that publication will hopefully come out in the next year or so. We'll definitely cover it on the SPARTIE Lab. But I did want to make it clear why we're called the SPARTIE Lab. It works on a few different levels. Speaking of multiple levels, we are making the podcast available on all the platforms, Apple, Spotify, Google, etc. And I don't know where people are listening, but if you're listening from somewhere else, let me know. Email me. At this point, I'm open to anyone communicating with me in any capacity about this podcast. Send me tweets at RARATAN. That's my Twitter. We should probably just have a lab Twitter handle and a Facebook and all the things. Should we TikTok? I don't know, maybe, but hit me up through any channel. Give me your advice, offer to co-host or produce or support the podcast in any way you think might be interesting, and I will definitely be open to it. Let me know why you're interested and what you want to hear. And thank you. I hope you've got a great 2021 going, and I look forward to your feedback.
Thank you for tuning into SPARTIE-Cast. Goodbye, world.